Every now and then, reality intrudes on a popular narrative, but unfortunately, this doesn't seem to have much of an effect in the short term. The purveyors of false narratives just continue to plough ahead, confident in their own ignorance because their views are reverberated back to them by the popular media. Now, I understand what people mean when they say that the gender pay gap is a myth, but that's not technically correct. It's real insofar as it does measure something. It's just that something is completely and utterly meaningless because it doesn't tell you anything about whether men and women are being treated equally with respect to pay in the workplace. And how could it? It's a simple average of all male full-time workers' pay compared to the average of all female full-time workers' pay. It doesn't take account of basic factors such as the type of jobs people do, hours worked, experience and qualifications, and a myriad of other factors that could be relevant in explaining that gap. Now, there are more serious scholars who try to control for those relevant factors, and when they do, the gender wage gap shrinks to the point of vanishing. And even what remains can't necessarily be chalked up to discrimination. In 2014, the American Association of University Women found that after controlling for relevant factors, the wage gap was 6.6%. And when asked how much of that is due to discrimination, the answer from spokesperson Lisa Matz on an NPR interview was, "We're still trying to figure that out." Trying to account for all the factors that may explain the wage gap is a near impossible task, but occasionally along comes a study for which you can rule out gender discrimination because certain jobs completely eliminate that possibility. You may remember back in February I reported on the gender pay gap at Uber. Now, given the unique nature of Uber's system, which is run by a gender-blind algorithm, gender discrimination of any kind was ruled out as a factor in explaining why male Uber drivers earn on average 7% more than female Uber drivers. This was of particular interest as it was assumed that the gig economy would help close the pay gap because women had a greater desire for workplace flexibility that the gig economy offered. There were three factors that drove men's higher average earnings. One, they had more experience using the platform. Two, they were more likely to drive at times and in areas with higher surge and lower wait times. And three, they drove faster. Driving faster accounted for half the gap. And now more recently we have a study from Harvard University that again shows the pay gap, this time with respect to bus and train operators, was entirely down to the different work choices of men and women. The paper, which I will link in the comments, was titled, "Why Do Women Earn Less Than Men? Evidence from Bus and Train Operators." The authors point out that bus and train operators at the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority are all represented by the same union and covered by the same bargaining agreement. That agreement specifies that seniority in one's garage is the sole determinant of one's work opportunities. Quote, "Conditional on seniority, men and women face the same choice sets of schedules, routes, vacation days and overtime hours, among other amenities. The earnings gap persists even when we condition on seniority, allowing us to explain the gap fully by the differences in choices that men and women make when faced with the same choice sets in the workplace." And what are those different choices? Well, broadly speaking, men take 48% fewer unpaid hours off and work 83% more overtime hours per year than women. The reason for these differences is not that men and women face different choice sets in this job. Rather, it is that women have greater demand for workplace flexibility and lower demand for overtime work hours than men. Women use the Family Medical Leave Act to take more unpaid time off than men, and they work fewer overtime hours at 1.5 times the wage rate. At the root of these different choices is the fact that women value time and flexibility more than men. Men and women choose to work similar hours of overtime when it is scheduled a quarter in advance, but men work nearly twice as many overtime hours than women when they are scheduled the day before. Using W-4 filings to ascertain marital status and the presence of dependents, we show that women with dependents, especially single women, value time away from work more than men with dependents. Interestingly, married men and women are about as equally likely to take up an offer of overtime. Crucially, a gap in overtime acceptance rates barely exists for those who are married. As we can see in Figure 10, married male operators with dependents are only 0 to 2 points more likely to accept overtime than married women with dependents. This suggests that those who are married with dependents, men and women, are able to divide up caretaking responsibilities at home in a way that allows them to work overtime at similar levels. Or perhaps the presence of dependents necessitates that women, as much as men, earn as much as possible to afford care. But what if you're married and have no children? Looking at operators who are married and without children, however, we see that men are as many as 6 percentage points more likely than women to accept an overtime opportunity. Married female operators who do not have dependents are, it seems, less likely to play the co-breadwinner than if they had dependents. Also, a big difference exists between single mums and dads. Diving deeper still, Figure 9 reveals that the biggest gaps in acceptance rates, up to 8 percentage points, are between single women and single men with dependents. These results suggest that single men are able to take care of their dependents by working more overtime, possibly to pay for child support or to finance other forms of childcare. Single women, on the other hand, appear to be making the decision to do the caretaking themselves rather than to caretake through additional earnings. But even if you look at single men and women with no dependents, men are still more likely by 3 to 4 percentage points to work overtime. Now, the MBTA put in place some changes in 2016 and 2017 to try and save money and reduce absenteeism, which resulted in narrowing the earnings gap from women earning 89 cents for every dollar a man makes in 2015 to 94 cents in 2017. The policies they implemented were firstly to make it harder to take FMLA leave, and the second was to change which hours qualified as overtime. The policies illustrate, however, that not all ways of shrinking the gender earnings gap are created equal, and some may come with substantial negative consequences. The increased oversight over FMLA usage, while reasonable, has decreased female operator welfare by forcing women to work hours that they previously revealed they prefer to avoid at the regular wage. The decrease in overtime hours, while also reasonable and in line with policies across the country, decreased male operator welfare the most by decreasing the value of extra work hours they previously wanted to work. Operators are now taking less leave, and the MBTA is spending less on overtime, saving taxpayers dollars. So a good outcome for taxpayers, and the earnings gap narrowed. However, this comes at a cost, as the authors note. While the policy changes reduced the earnings gap from 89 cents to 94 cents and made it harder for operators to trade off regular hours for overtime, they also decreased women's well-being by further constraining the work environment. The authors don't comment on whether the reduced opportunity for overtime affects male well-being. Remember that the MBTA did not implement the changes for the purpose of reducing the earnings gap. They were trying to reduce absenteeism and save money on overtime. However, the unintended consequences are something to think about for others trying to eliminate earnings gaps. You may succeed in closing the gap, but if women prefer flexibility over more money, then it could have unintended negative effects. And that's why I prefer to let individuals decide what to do rather than social engineers telling them what they should do. Anyway, as usual, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.